Right. Hello, everyone, and welcome back. It's time to dive into another super important topic, one that's a mainstay in the UPSC syllabus.
Oh, absolutely, inflation.
And trust me when I say this one really pops up everywhere,
It really does.
from those preliminary exams all the way to those intense interview rounds.
hmm
So today, we're going deep, a deep dive into the two major ways that we measure inflation, WPI and CPI. You ready to decode these acronyms with me and understand why they're just so crucial for the UPSC journey?
I think it's really interesting you mentioned the UPSC aspect of this because, understanding these indices goes beyond just straight up memorizing them.
Yeah.
It's really about understanding the real world implications
Okay.
and, how these indices connect to policies that, you might one day be shaping.
Exactly. It's about that bigger picture.
Yeah.
It's not just about the definitions. So before we jump into all the details of WPI and CPI, let's try to ground ourselves with a relatable example.
Okay.
So imagine you're back in 2011 just picking up a simple bag of rice.
Yeah.
Let's say it cost you about $500.
Right.
Fast forward to today, now that same bag of rice might set you back $700.
Mm-hmm.
What happened there?
Well,
That, my friends, is inflation.
inflation in action.
In action.
Yeah, and it's not just rice, right? It's that steady climb in prices of almost everything, from vegetables, textbooks.
Oh, yeah. Everything.
Your money is essentially buying less and less.
Less power.
Yeah, economists define inflation as this general increase in prices of goods and services, leading to that decline in purchasing power.
It's like your money is slowly shrinking.
Exactly.
Which, as future policymakers, this is something you need to understand.
It's a big deal.
Big deal. Now let's tackle the first of our indices, WPI,
Okay.
which stands for
Wholesale Price Index.
Wholesale Price Index. And just like the name suggests, it's all about tracking those prices at the wholesale level.
Mhm.
So think more like those bulk transactions between businesses, not what you're paying at your local grocery store.
Exactly.
And this is where it gets interesting, especially for those prelims.
Right.
Remember, WPI is solely focused on goods,
Yes.
not services.
Uh-huh.
So it will definitely track those price fluctuations, let's say, of raw cotton.
Okay.
But it won't factor in the cost of actually tailoring that cotton into a finished shirt.
That's a great distinction to remember.
Yes, definitely. Now, how is this WPI actually calculated? Is there some, secret formula they have tucked away in the RBI headquarters?
Well, it's not quite the secret formula, but there is a specific methodology to it.
Okay.
So currently, WPI uses 2011-12 as its base year,
Right.
and it tracks a pretty big number, 697 items across 3 major categories.
Wow.
So we have primary articles, fuel and power, and manufactured goods.
Okay, so it's like they're trying to follow, the entire life cycle of the product almost.
Exactly. You can think of it that way.
Okay, so starting with the raw materials, like the cotton we talked about, the crude oil.
Right, and those all fall into the primary articles.
Primary articles. Okay, so that
Yeah.
covers the raw materials. But what about the actual production process?
Right.
That's where the fuel and power comes in.
Yeah, you got it. So that's tracking the cost of all those essential energy sources. So
Mhm.
your petrol, your diesel, electricity, the things that are needed to run those factories,
Yeah.
to transform those raw materials into those finished products.
And then finally, we have the manufactured goods.
Exactly.
That's everything from the clothes we wear to the stationery we use.
It's a big category.
It is. So essentially, this WPI gives us like a snapshot of the price trends at each stage.
At each stage of production.
Yeah. So from those raw materials all the way to that final product, that's a pretty comprehensive view, right?
It is. It is. But it's important to remember that WPI doesn't tell us the whole story,
Right.
especially from a consumer's perspective.
Right.
That's where CPI comes in. But before we jump into that, let's unpack 2 terms you'll see very frequently in your UPSC journey: headline and core inflation.
Ah, yes. These always seemed a bit tricky to me. So they both relate to inflation, but what's the difference?
Okay, so think of headline inflation as the big picture,
Right.
right? It includes all those 697 items in the WPI basket and gives you a general sense of, how prices are moving.
Okay.
However, it can be influenced by short-term fluctuations,
Okay.
especially in volatile sectors like food and fuel. Imagine a sudden spike in, let's say, onion prices
Oh, yeah.
due to, bad weather or something like that.
Happens all the time.
That's definitely going to show up in that headline inflation.
So that's where core inflation comes in.
Yes.
It's like we're trying to filter out all that noise to get a clearer picture.
Precisely. Core inflation excludes those more volatile prices like food and fuel.
Okay.
And it provides a more stable measure of those underlying inflationary trends.
Okay, so this distinction is...
It's very important.
Yeah, very important.
Especially for policymakers. They need to make decisions that aren't, swayed by those temporary price swings.
Got it. This definitely clarifies those two. Now let's switch to CPI.
Okay.
Which, as you mentioned, is offering a different lens on inflation. What exactly does this consumer price index track, and why is it relevant for, someone who is preparing for the UPSC?
So, while WPI gives us insights into those producer-level price trends, CPI focuses on the costs that consumers like you and me are bearing.
Right.
This means it includes a wider range of goods and services,
Right.
including things like housing, transportation, and education, which are critical parts of our daily lives.
So CPI is almost like getting a glimpse into that average household budget
Exactly.
and how inflation is affecting their purchasing power.
It offers a more grounded view
Yes.
of how those price changes impact, the common person,
Their cost of living.
their cost of living.
Yeah, and this is crucial for understanding, the socioeconomic implications of inflation. And this is where it gets really interesting. Back in 2014, a pretty significant shift occurred.
Yes.
The Reserve Bank of India, the RBI, decided to adopt CPI as its key measure of inflation.
Mm-hmm.
That's a big change.
Good change.
Why would they make such a significant shift? What's the reasoning for choosing CPI over WPI?
So this shift was actually recommended by the Urjit Patel Committee.
Okay.
And their reasoning was pretty straightforward. CPI provides a more accurate picture, a reflection of the actual cost of living experienced by people.
By the consumer.
Yeah. This allows the RBI to tailor its monetary policy,
Okay.
including things like interest rate decisions to ensure price stability.
This makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
By focusing on CPI, the RBI is ensuring that its policies are aligned with the realities that consumers face every day.
Exactly.
But what about WPI? Has it been completely sidelined? Does it still have any relevance in the Indian economy?
It still plays a role, but it is undergoing some significant changes.
Okay.
Remember how we talked about that base year being 2011-12? Well, the Indian economy has evolved drastically since then.
Of course.
And WPI needs a revamp to reflect these changes.
Okay.
So the government has actually set up an expert panel to revise WPI and potentially transition to something called the Producer's Price Index, or PPI.
PPI, this sounds like a whole new ballgame.
It is.
What's the story behind this potential shift, and why is it so significant for, someone prepping for the UPSC?
That's a great question, and it's something that we'll delve deeper into in the next part of our deep dive.
Okay.
Stay tuned, because understanding these nuances could be the key to acing those tricky economics questions in your mains exam.
Ooh.
And, impressing that interview panel with your insightful analysis.
Yeah. This has been an incredibly illuminating discussion so far. I'm already starting to see how these concepts connect to, the bigger picture of the economic landscape. But before we move on, quick reminder to hit that subscribe button. Give us a like if you're finding this deep dive helpful for your UPSC journey. We'll be back with part 2, where we'll unpack this whole PPI and explore its implications for the Indian economy.
And for your UPSC preparation.
And for UPSC preparation. See you soon.
See you soon.
Welcome back to our deep dive into inflation and its key indicators. Last time we talked about WPI, CPI, and their relevance to, aspiring policymakers. Now, let's unravel this whole transition towards PPI. You mentioned it before the break. What's really driving this shift? And, how does it fit into that larger picture of the economy?
You see, the Indian economy, it's constantly evolving.
Right.
Adapting
Yeah.
to global trends. And that WPI, remember, with its base year of 2011-12, it just doesn't fully capture all the nuances of this modern economy that we're in. Think about it. The rise of e-commerce, the integration of global supply chains, the expanding role of the services sector. These are all big shifts that we need represented in those economic indicators.
So it's almost like the WPI is getting that much needed upgrade to keep up with the times.
Exactly.
And that's where PPI comes in.
Yes. PPI offers a more granular view of those price trends
Okay.
at the producer level, providing a more accurate and comprehensive picture
Yeah.
of those forces that shape inflation.
Okay, so I remember you said that WPI focuses solely on goods.
Right.
PPI, it's taking a broader perspective.
It is. It encompasses both goods and services.
Okay.
So it gives us a more sort of holistic representation of producer costs.
This broader scope definitely sounds like it's a bit more aligned with, just how complex our modern economy really is.
Absolutely.
But how exactly does PPI differ from WPI in terms of its calculation?
Okay.
Will it still track those, 697 items?
So that's where that expert panel really comes in.
Okay.
They're tasked with not only revising that basket of goods, but also potentially shifting the base year
Okay.
to something a little more recent, like 2022-23.
Wow.
This means they're doing a thorough analysis of the current economic landscape, figuring out, which goods and services are really the most relevant to this Indian economy.
Yeah.
Some items might be removed, some new ones will be added, and the weights will be adjusted to reflect their importance.
This sounds like a massive undertaking,
It is.
like a complete overhaul
It really is.
of how we measure these producer prices. I can see why they've given them until June 2026 to actually submit the report.
Yeah, because it's no easy feat to capture, how dynamic an economy like India is in a single index.
Exactly. And the implications of a shift like this are far-reaching,
Accurate.
extending beyond, just academic discussions.
Right.
I mean, for policymakers, this PPI could provide so much richer data to inform decisions about, industrial policy, infrastructure development, even trade negotiations.
Oh, yeah. All very important areas.
Yeah. So having a more accurate, detailed picture of, these producer prices, that would definitely help with policy formulation.
For sure.
What about us, the UPSC aspirants? How does this transition to PPI directly affect our preparation?
So I think this shift to PPI highlights something really crucial about those UPSC exams. It's the ability to analyze and adapt to those changing economic realities. You might encounter questions about why this transition is happening, what are the potential benefits and challenges,
Right.
or even what kind of impact it's having on various sectors.
So it's not just about memorizing definitions.
It's just not.
It's about showing that you understand that this economic landscape is evolving.
Yes, you need to demonstrate that deep understanding.
And the factors influencing these policy decisions.
Absolutely.
This PPI transition could be a goldmine for those analytical essay questions.
Oh, yeah, in your mains exam. It really showcases your ability to think critically and connect the dots between theory and practice.
Yeah.
Articulate a well-informed perspective on these current issues. And this brings us to two other important concepts that pop up a lot in those UPSC discussions: stagflation and deflation.
These terms always seemed, a little daunting to me. I remember them in my economics textbooks. But a quick recap would be great.
Sure, okay. So imagine a scenario where you have economic growth, it stagnates, unemployment is rising,
Okay.
and yet prices continue to climb.
It sounds,
It's kind of a perfect storm.
yeah, like a nightmare.
It is. It's like a nightmare for the economy, and that's basically what stagflation is.
So the economy is stuck, but inflation just keeps going.
Keeps gnawing away at that purchasing power.
And deflation, I think, is the opposite, right?
You got it. Deflation is characterized by a general decline in the price level.
Okay.
So that means there's an increase in the purchasing power of money. And while that might seem good on the surface, prolonged deflation can be really bad. Well, it can discourage investment and spending, which ultimately hinders growth.
So it's all about finding that balance.
Exactly.
Avoiding both those extremes.
Yeah.
Runaway inflation, prolonged deflation.
Maintaining price stability, that's a fundamental goal for any economy. And understanding these concepts is it's crucial
It is.
for anyone who wants to contribute to economic policymaking. Now let's circle back to this RBI decision to use CPI.
Yes, I'm really curious to understand the reasoning behind this whole shift, what the implications are for monetary policy. Was this purely an academic decision, or were there, practical concerns at play?
That's a great question, and it's something that we'll explore in detail in the next part of our deep dive.
Okay.
We'll delve into the reasoning behind the shift, its impact on those interest rate decisions,
Yes.
and its significance for the economy. Stay tuned as we kind of uncover the story behind the RBI's choice and equip you with some valuable insights for your UPSC journey.
This has been an incredibly insightful journey so far, decoding WPI and CPI, understanding headline and core inflation, even exploring the dynamics of stagflation and deflation. It's amazing how all these concepts that seem like jargon are directly connected to the realities of the Indian economy and to millions of lives.
And remember, this knowledge isn't just for acing your UPSC exams, it's about understanding the world around you
Yeah.
and being able to contribute meaningfully to making it better.
Before we wrap up this part, just a gentle reminder to hit that subscribe button. Give us a like if you're finding this deep dive valuable for your UPSC preparations. We'll be back with the final part, where we uncover that story behind the RBI's transition to CPI
And explore its implications.
and explore its implications. See that?
See you soon.
Welcome back to the final part of our deep dive into, well, inflation and those measures that help us understand its impact. We've already covered WPI, CPI, even talked about that shift towards PPI. So now let's circle back to that big decision by the RBI to actually adopt CPI as their main way to measure inflation. What was behind that shift, and how does it affect monetary policy, especially for, someone like me who wants to get into policymaking?
I think that's a really insightful question, and it shows that you get just how complex managing an economy can be. Remember, the main thing the RBI wants to do is keep prices stable.
Right.
And to do that well, they need a measure that accurately reflects, the price pressures that people are actually facing.
So it's not about just picking any index. It's about picking the one that really reflects the reality for consumers. So is that why they went with CPI?
Exactly. That Urjit Patel committee, the one that had to recommend an inflation measure to the RBI, they realized that WPI wasn't really showing the whole picture because it was so focused on wholesale. CPI, though, includes a wider range of stuff, those essential things like housing, transportation, education. It gives a much better look at the actual cost of living for the average household.
It's like they're shifting their view from just what's happening in the factories to what's happening at people's kitchen tables. They're focused on the prices that really matter to the people they're trying to help.
That's the perfect way to put it. By going with CPI, the RBI is basically saying, we're making our policies based on what people are actually experiencing, making sure our decisions line up with how people are really budgeting and spending.
Okay, so that makes sense from a policy point of view, but how does this actually play out? How does CPI change the way the RBI sets interest rates and handles inflation?
Think of CPI like a compass that's guiding the RBI as they set their monetary policy. If CPI shows that inflation is getting too high, going beyond what the RBI is comfortable with, they might raise interest rates to sort of cool things down and get people to spend less. But if inflation is staying low, they might lower rates to encourage more economic activity.
So CPI isn't just some number they look at. It's a tool they use to make smart decisions about managing inflation. This is definitely something I need to keep in mind for my UPSC exams, understanding how CPI affects these policy choices.
And it's not just about knowing how it works. It's about seeing how important it is for the economy as a whole. Choosing CPI shows that people are starting to see how important it is to make economic policies that actually benefit individuals and families.
It's about realizing that these economic numbers aren't just abstract ideas, they're connected to real people and how they're able to afford things and live a good life.
Yes, exactly. And for anyone who wants to create policies that affect so many people, understanding this is essential. It's knowing that economic decisions have real consequences and trying to make policies that help the economy grow while also making sure people's lives are getting better.
This has been an amazing journey, breaking down WPI and CPI, getting why the RBI switched to CPI, and even looking at PPI and what it could mean. We've learned a lot, and I feel so much more prepared to handle those tough economics questions in my UPSC exams.
And this is really just the start of your exploration. Economics is huge and always changing, so there's always more to learn and discover. Keep asking questions, keep looking deeper, and keep trying to understand how our world works.
Before we go, we want to leave you with one last thing to think about. With India moving towards PPI, how could that change economic policy and analysis? And what might it mean for different parts of the Indian economy? Think about it, do some more research, and see where it leads you. And if you like this deep dive, make sure to subscribe and give us a like. We'll be back with more discussions on important topics, helping you navigate the world and reach your goals.
See you next time.